Thanks for joining us today. Just a quick reminder before we get started, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional care. If you are in immediate danger or at risk of harming yourself or someone else, please call your local emergency number or contact a crisis line right now.
Today, we're talking about anxiety. It's the most common and treatable mental health condition in the world, yet it's often left untreated. Join us today as we discuss the difference between stress and anxiety and how we can use AI for psychoeducation so you can differentiate between them both and identify the right coping techniques.
This is the AI Therapy Podcast, where we discuss mindful use of AI for self help. A consumer insights nerd and a techie are joined by a practicing psychologist to unpack when AI can be helpful, where it shouldn't be used, and best ways to interact with AI to get the support you need. AI Therapy Podcast: practical tools, real talk, and a mindful take on technology. Welcome to the episode, everyone. And if you're new here, welcome to the party. We're excited that you're joining us on this journey. So, yeah, back to anxiety. Just let's kick it off with sharing a couple of facts, a couple of stats with you. So, first one, anxiety disorders are the most common mental health condition in the world, affecting about 4% of people globally. And wait for this, nearly 360 million people suffer from anxiety.
That's a lot.
I know that's kind of a mind-blowing fact, right?
Mhm.
And that's a stat from the WHO. Here's another one for you, also from WHO. Despite being so common, only about 25%, so that's a quarter of people with anxiety actually get treatment.
Hmm. Surprising.
Yeah, and I mean, Nate, I'm already looking at you because I want to hear your POV on this. So why only 25% of folks get treated for anxiety? Like that sounds mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of different thoughts come to mind. We've discussed before that there is a lot of stigma around seeking mental health help. So a lot of folks just feel too ashamed or too embarrassed, or as if it would make them seem weak or somehow less than to go and seek out psychotherapy. They would think that this would confirm that there is something extremely pathological about them, for example. Another reason might be that, as we said before, therapy is not as accessible these days. It's pretty significant barrier for a lot of folks to the cost that is to try and pursue therapy. And another reason might be some people just don't even realize that they're experiencing or struggling with anxiety. Quite often, individuals come to my office due to other presenting issues or concerns. And only then, as we start talking, as I start doing an assessment and checking in with them, we start to realize, okay, well, what you've been suffering from for years, and maybe something that even runs in your family, is something that's consistent with diagnosis of anxiety.
Right, which is kind of what Herrick said right at the very beginning of the episode, that it hides in plain sight. I feel like anxiety is one of those things that you're just kind of forced to believe, well, that's just part of your personality. You're just a worrier. You're just, nervous about things, right? Not like it's not really typically recognized as a mental condition. That's who you are.
Exactly, exactly. So sometimes it actually takes psychoeducation with the client in order for them to realize that what they're suffering from is anxiety.
Okay, hold up for a second. So, what is psychoeducation?
Right. So psychoeducation, it's a process where in therapy we do structured plain language teaching. So we explain the condition that the client might be dealing with, and we do it with the goal of helping to reduce their concern about it and support healthier coping. So it's not diagnosis, it's not treatment, but it's helping the client understand the underlying psychological condition. it's different from what folks usually expect from scene in therapy in a way that therapy is quite often, as we said before, is non-directive. So we want client to lead. We want to ask the client question and for them to generate their own insight, for them to reflect. With psychoeducation, it's different. It's similar to usual education. It's similar to a usual way of teaching things, but in this case, we are teaching concepts that are rooted in clinical counseling or in general psychology. So things here that we can do, we can name mechanisms that reduce uncertainty and avoidance. And as a result of that, we improve their readiness for self-help or therapy. And quite often, for example, when we talk about anxiety, it is something that we can do early on, as in the examples that we've discussed. Quite often, folks might not even be aware of suffering from anxiety. So we explain to them what anxiety is, how it manifests itself, what are the typical symptoms of it.
Okay, I'm gonna take a stab at seeing if I can paraphrase a little bit that in a super layman's terms, but is it essentially putting a label to an emotion and basically helping people understand what they're feeling and ultimately learning how to cope with it?
Yeah, you got it. It's just a little bit broader than just an emotion. It can be anything. It can be, as a condition that they are suffering from. It can be symptoms that they're exhibiting, emotional states that they find difficult, psychological states, challenges, tendencies that they notice in themselves.
And you've mentioned the word condition a few times, so can you maybe give an example of a condition?
Okay, so if you don't mind, I'll chime in. I feel
All
like
right.
it's a bit of a giveaway. Anxiety is a really great example here because we've been talking about it and, bit of a teaser. That is what we're going to be spending the rest of the episode on because it's such a common condition. A lot of us can relate to it. I suppose the way I would explain it here is, if you feel, and we'll go into what anxiety is, but it's like, oh, this feeling I have, there's this tightness in my chest and I think about what's going to happen and I'm spiraling. Well, you're not just spiraling. Very high likelihood you're actually experiencing anxiety. So it's not just like you're in this weird mood where you can't stop worrying. No, this is part of psychoeducation and it's an actual condition. Is that fair to say? How did I do?
I think you did really well.
But actually, before we even move forward, let me throw another stat at you. So in the United States, nearly 1 in 5 adults had an anxiety disorder in the past year, and about 3 in 10 will experience one in their lifetime. And like as crazy as that sounds, that also doesn't surprise me, right? Okay, back to our topic here.
All right.
We are going to be talking a lot about anxiety and psychoeducation here, but I have a question. So every time or almost every time we talk about anxiety, stress and anxiety are often used in the same sentence, right? So it's like these two terms are very often used together. Why is that? Are they the same thing?
Stress and anxiety actually are different terms and different phenomena. People might be bulking them together because quite often it can be continuum. So, for example, if you're very stressed, you become more vulnerable to experience the symptoms of anxiety, etc. Stress is usually linked to immediate demands and usually time limited. So, it's something that's happening in the here, in the now, that are realistic, sometimes maybe extensive demands on you that make most people feel, no pun intended, stressed. While anxiety is more a future-oriented alarm. And what happens with anxiety, it sort of narrows your attention and down and it drives avoidance. So with anxiety, quite often we will be projecting far into the future and a lot of the projected outcomes will be overgeneralized, exaggerated, catastrophized. Actually, we call it as one of cognitive mistakes or cognitive distortions, catastrophization. When we take very or highly unlikely outcome and really over focus on it, where all the attention is given to that potential outcome, even though the probability of that outcome coming to be is a less than fraction of a percent even, right? So these are the differences. Once again, stress is immediate demands, usually time limited, and anxiety is future oriented and quite often is less rooted in evidence.
Got it. Okay. So let me say that back to you for a sec to make sure we're all on the same page. So when it comes to let me give you a scenario and maybe we'll stick with the scenario for the rest of the episode, but let's use work. I think we can all relate to that. So work related stress is, for instance, I have a year end report that's due. And I know I don't have enough time and I'm kind of stressing because, I have only a few hours to finish it and I have other constraints and I'm quote unquote stressed out. Anxiety is more around I have this report, I don't have enough time, but also I'm worried it's not going to be good and then my boss will not like it and then I won't get, the promotion that I want
Get
and
fired.
I get fired from my job and then I won't be able to get another job and I guess that's a good example of catastrophizing.
Yeah, now you're in an anxious loop. And why it's important for us to differentiate is because, as you will see in the prompt of the week, to help us identify better coping strategies. So, if it's stress, there will be one set of coping strategies that will come in better. For example, quite often finding practical solutions, calming down nervous system. These are some of the examples come up. While with anxiety, we might maybe focus on cognitive restructuring, on perspective taking. So trying to see it from far and try to see would anybody else see the situation the same way? Are the perceived threats or are those scary pictures that my mind is throwing at me as realistic as they seem to be in my current attention span?
Well, it's funny you kind of beat me to it, but I was going to say, so before we jump into the prompt, I guess if we were to tell our listeners, like, what is the goal? What are we trying to get out of today's prompt? But I feel like you kind of answered it, right? What we're trying to get out, right? If you're using that prompt is being able to walk away with some coping mechanisms and maybe techniques, not necessarily to make you feel better, but be able to reflect on the situation that you're dealing with. Like, is that accurate or?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. We will use this prompt to demonstrate how to use the psychoeducation with the help of AI, and we will structure it in a twofold way. First part will be helping the user understand their condition. For example, differentiate between stress or anxiety. B, to identify the main components of it and let's say outline or map them into some of the major approaches of psychology that seem to be most helpful according to evidence-based practices. So we will help the users understand how particular practice, how particular approach to therapy help explain what they're experiencing. And on the other hand, we will, based on that and on the delineation between stress and anxiety, we will try to provide them with next steps, with coping strategies.
Perfect. I'm excited to get into it.
Okay, great.
All right. So for the prompt of this week, you may notice when you take a look, it is quite a bit in length, but there's a reason for that. We wanted to make it as structured as possible and went to the nth degree to try to make sure it is so. We will go through some sections of the prompt and we will really dissect into those and explain to you why we crafted it that way.
I do want to call out that this is a slightly longer episode, and we want to spend more time in the second half of the episode really diving into the AI's response once it has taken all of Herrick's inputs and now kind of gave back its explanation in terms of its interpretations of Herrick's situations and his response. So we will be reviewing it from both a CBT perspective as well as an ACT perspective. So please stick around to actually hear those explanations, because I think those are the biggest kind of aha moments and educational parts of the episode that all of us really found interesting. So just wanted to put that out there.
And we'll also call out some changes you could make that are more catered to your own needs. So again, we want to teach you how to fish instead of giving you the fish, basically.
It's a good analogy.
Yeah, right.
Mhm.
It's original. It's one of my own. You may have heard of it. Yeah? No? Okay. All right.
Not
And
AI
we
written.
also crafted the prompt to resemble what a live therapy session could potentially sound like. So again, the more explicit and detailed the prompt that you write generally will ensure you'll get better results. But, do what you can and whatever you're comfortable with, and we'll get straight to it then.
Okay, amazing. And yeah, as Herrick said, it is long, but no work required for you. Just copy paste it and off you go.
Within the prompt, there's a section called role, and I'm going to read out that for you right here. You're a warm, practical psychoeducation guide. You help the user understand what's happening in their mind, body, and why, using plain language and mapping their specific details into a stress response explanation, cognitive behavioral therapy, and acceptance and commitment therapy. Then, if they want, guide one coping practice step by step and remind them that this is self-education, not therapy, diagnosis, or crisis support. So in that prompt, at least that section, you could modify it if you want to. You can change the tone to something that matches your behavior or what you would like from your AI to talk to you about.
Herrick, I was wondering, could you explain more to the listeners what is the goal behind that section, role?
Yeah, so it's kind of like, think about when you're talking to someone and how you see them. You can think of it literally into a role. Who are they? Are they a friend? Are they someone more authoritative? Are they someone that's challenging you? Are they someone who is presenting things in a specific manner? And what is the type of relationship you would like with this AI, I guess, in this case? We said warm in this case, just to have a nice conversation. But you know what? You can kind of choose a specific type that works according to you.
Right. We've been
Okay.
talking to some folks and they were like, well, you know what? I actually don't want warm. I want a very direct. That's kind of what I
Yeah, you
respond
know
to better.
what helps you get through it, I guess.
Okay. So you're telling AI who they are. So in that case, they're a psychoeducator and how you want them to be, what type of a psychoeducation guide you want them to be. You want them to be in this prompt to be warm, but what Masha is saying here is actually where you can specify the tone, that they can be more kind of critical, I guess, or extra sensitive, for example, etc. Am I getting
Yeah,
that right?
yeah, exactly. Like if you've played with other AI type software, you can even see they get to pick like a persona, just be like, this is persona A. They're very cheerful and happy and go lucky. And, persona B might be more of a technical person and talks in a specific way and manner. It's kind of like that.
Okay, yeah, that's my understanding too. That sounds great.
Okay, so another section that we're putting kind of early on in the prompt is non-negotiable limits. And a couple of bullets under there are ultimately do not diagnose, treat, or give medical advice. And again, I'm going to keep probably repeating this every episode just because of how important it is. But we've talked about this in episode 1, 2, 3, and 4. AI is not meant to diagnose or treat you or give you any sort of advice, medical or not, quite frankly, unless you want advice on how to fix your Windows. But ultimately, that's not what we're looking for it to do. So we want to tell it over and over again. And you heard us actually tell it multiple times in episode 3 that we're not looking for diagnosis. Don't be directive. The second thing is do not ask for identifying details. So we don't want AI to ask us, about the name of the friend or an employer or an address if If you're uncertain, say so plainly. So I think that's refers to basically when we were talking like if AI is not sure, it's still going to sound sure.
Oh, yeah. Remember how it's always like, that's completely honest and true, but
Right, right,
even when
right,
it's not
right.
really the case. So, that's what do we say? That term is called sycophancy.
Sycophancy, right.
Jinx. There we go. Yeah.
And finally, if the user indicates imminent danger to self or to others, to stop and direct them to local emergency services or a crisis line immediately. So ultimately, I would say this section is, as we say, non-negotiable limits, and that should be part of any prompt, regardless of what you're doing.
Yeah. Think of it as guardrails to help you and guide you to make sure your data or whatnot is as safe as you can.
Great.
So this is the prompt that I sent to ChatGPT. I was at work and late in the afternoon, my boss came over to me and said he needed the end of year report ASAP. I already had a lot of things on my plate, so this was just adding yet another thing, and this is making me really stressed. Okay, and this is what it said.
That sounds like a lot. Being handed an urgent end of year report late in the day when you're already stretched thin would put pressure on anyone. When you picture that moment, your boss saying he needs it ASAP, what do you notice in your body right now?
So I want to just look at Nate for this for a second. Could you help us understand what's going on here? Why is this the next follow-up question? And I guess how does that tie back to the prompt?
Mm-hmm. Well, a few elements as I'm looking at the prompt, folks. First, in the part of the prompt that's called conversational style, we asked AI to sound human and validating and specific from the first line after the user shares anything, right? So that's exactly what she did. She confirmed the situation, validated Herring, saying that most people would feel stressed at the moment, and sounded pretty natural, I would say, right? Herrick, how did that sound to you, for example? Did that sound validating? How did you feel with that feedback?
Yeah, I thought it was reassuring, it was calm, and sounded like a question that made sense in terms of if I were to go to therapy.
Exactly. And the next question is also very important here. That makes sense to me. So this is where AI tries to help you identify the bodily sensations associated with the particular emotions and the situation that you're experiencing, because it helps you to, for example, recognize some of the emotions even if you're not as acutely aware of them at the moment. So, for example, let's say you will name sensation X, and with time you learn to realize, okay, when I feel, let's say, tightness in the chest, even though I might cognitively not recognize at the moment that I'm experiencing anxiety, that can be a telling sign for me that, okay, this is anxiety. This is something that I typically experience when anxiety kicks in. So that might help you put your finger on it and find better coping strategies.
I'm so glad you talked about it. It helps you kind of recognize and then hopefully put a label that it's not just the tightness in the chest. It actually is connected to something else. So I think that's really interesting. And I never thought of it or understood it that way before.
Well, another reason, as you're talking with Masha, is that quite often for a lot of people, they might experience anxiety in a less cognitive and more bodily level, right? But so the reason we want to be aware of the sensations, there is at least two aspects: a, building awareness and getting to know yourself and your nervous system and your body and how it reacts to different stimuli, and b, it's choosing coping strategies.
And as Herrick continued with the conversation, one thing that I want to call out is that AI is now clearly switching from talking about physical sensations in your body to now asking what emotions are coming up for you. Nate, can you talk a little bit about that and explain to the listeners why that change is happening?
What we're getting at here is a very basic, very core cognitive behavioral therapy concept that the way we feel is usually a result of how we think about the situation. So two people might think about the same situation in entirely different ways, and as a result, will have very different bodily sensations and emotions related to it.
So I have a question. So if Herrick perceives this situation as stressful, then the natural bodily response would be to tense up, to lock up, to start sweating. If Herrick instead perceived this situation, let's say, as annoying or frustrating, but not stressful, his body probably wouldn't tense up, right? Then maybe his I don't know. Sorry, I don't know what you would do from a body perspective. Maybe you wanted to like kick something, or you wanted to start avoiding it or postponing it till later, right? So, same situation, but based on how he views it, his body would respond very differently.
His body will respond differently and he will cope with it differently.
Right, right. So,
I mean,
avoidance rather than like, right? Okay.
exactly, other than obsession, for example, other than thinking about it and other than it being intrusive.
All right. So, in some of the further discussions I had with AI, it asked me a few questions. First of all, it asked me what kind of emotions I was feeling. And I was a mix, but predominantly a little bit of annoyance at the whole situation at first. And then it was more about being worried, more so about like how I'm doing at my job, if I'm going to suck, if it's going to mean I'm going to lose my job or anything major like that. Then AI was like, okay, let's talk a bit more about it. And it ultimately asked me about what are some of the core values I hold, as well as what is ultimately at stake here. I pondered about that for a bit. And I responded and said that I think it means that all the things I'm worried about is in relations to the fact that I want to make sure that I can support my family. I want to be there for them, be able to pay the bills, provide them the safety and flexibility that they need.
And now that AI has all of its inputs that we've written into the prompt, it's now ready to explain to us or to Herrick in this situation what is likely happening in his body, in his mind, and what it is that he is experiencing. So, this is where real psychoeducation starts. It's kind of a long response. It's about 3 minutes if we were to play it out loud. So, what we'll try to do is we'll try to break it down into kind of three main sections and have a little bit of a discussion about each one. Okay, so the first part of the response, the summary that we got, is around your body plus mind response and the loop that keeps happening. So, depending on the state that your body is in physically and the emotions you're feeling, what your body does. So let's have a listen.
What your stress response is doing, body plus mind. Your nervous system treats threats to important values, here, your family stability, as urgent. When your boss gave you the last minute task, body, your hands got sweaty and muscles tensed because your system prepared for action. Mind, attention narrows and locks onto the scariest possibilities, the what ifs about performance and job security, creating replay loops where the worry keeps coming back.
I think this is a very good summary of, I think, the conversation you kind of had with AI before and what you fed. But what do you think, Herrick? Does this feel representative of the situation?
I think it did a great job at replaying the situation to me and breaking it down between body and mind. A lot of it was just like reconstructing my words and presenting it in a easy to consume format. So it wasn't really like net new or very striking to me, but then they did have a few phrases that I kind of like locked onto. So for the body, there was this one sentence where it says, even though this is a work problem, the brain's alarm doesn't distinguish perfectly between physical danger and social work pressures.
Right,
And I thought
right.
that was interesting. And the other thing around the mind is it kind of gives a reassurance because it said that you essentially will lock onto the scariest what ifs and it makes you know that your brain is going to the deepest and darkest places
Right.
and replaying the loops and amplifying it, which may not be legitimately what's happening. And sometimes that's how you scare yourself.
Yeah, folks, I agree. This is great. I guess what she is doing here is quite elegant and multi-layered and nuanced, because what we see her doing is bringing all the approaches that we asked her to use. So, ACT and CBT, for example, she is bringing them together in this very accessible explanation, where without using any specific terms or terminology yet. So she is using such concepts as values from ACT. Okay, this is what's at stake for you. Your family is at stake, right? She is linking, building that loop or that link that we spoke about before between the situation, thought, and bodily sensations and emotions. Because so much is at stake, or because of the meaning it carries for you, that's CBT, right? Because of what your thoughts are telling you is happening here, you're having this particular reaction in your body, and you're having the emotions stemming from it. So this is great. This really makes sense, and this gives the users the first taste of what type of explanation they would be getting, and in a very smoothly integrated way. After that, we will be doing the psychoeducation when it comes to a particular approach, so users can also become more informed and apply those concepts for themselves or to look it up.
Okay, now let's take a look at how this is explained from a CBT perspective.
Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Situation. Boss hands you an urgent report late in the day. Hot thought. If I don't do this well, my work and reputation could be questioned. Maybe I could even lose my job. Meaning, stake. Losing the job threatens your ability to provide and protect your family's stability. Emotionless body. That thought fuels worry and body tension / sweaty hand. Urge action. You texted your wife to prepare her and went into crunch mode to get it done right. Short term relief, long term cost. This action reduces immediate worry and protects quality, but keeps your nervous system sensitive to future last minute tasks because the brain treats them as dangerous.
Okay, so this is exactly what we said. Here, she is providing the psychoeducation and mapping the user's particular situation into the CBT concepts: situation, thought, emotions. And then it also looks at coping from a pros and cons point of view, right? So we already discussed what this situation, thoughts, and emotions and bodily sensations are. And I think she does a great job re-explaining the link and applying those concepts and mapping them out within CBT. What is also interesting is she looks at behavior. That's the behavioral part of cognitive behavioral therapy. How do you respond to things? So in sometimes you either change the behavior, or the result of changing the way you think about the situation is a different behavior. So in this case, comments are about Herrick's behavioral response. So what we see here, and the additional part, is the coping. She is explaining the pros, the short-term benefits of Herrick's decision. He addressed the anxiety about work-related situation, so he went into crunch mode and actually got things done, so he doesn't have to worry about having problems at work. And he also messaged his wife, so that way he can feel safe and feel that he fulfilled his relational obligations. However, the long term concerns here are that in the future he still remains vulnerable to these types of situations, that the issue is not resolved, that he still doesn't know how to deal or balance those things in the future. And there is a possibility that if he doesn't, for example, put appropriate boundaries, of building up chronicle stress, and from this potentially following anxiety, if he doesn't find more adaptive way to cope with the situations in the future, for example, once again establishing the boundary with the boss, or finding another way to communicate it to his family.
Okay, so the final section here will explain to us what's happening from an ACT perspective.
Acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, focuses on moving toward values even when uncomfortable feelings are present. Values needs providing for your family, protecting freedom and stability, being a dependable husband and father, making room, even if worry and tension are present. ACT encourages noticing them without needing to eliminate them immediately. Small step. You took a step aligned with your value, messaging your wife and starting the work, even while the worry was active. That's a micro 8 move. Living your values through the discomfort, not waiting for it to disappear.
So going through the AI questions, I thought that this section of ACT and the question it asked in relations to my values was the thing that brought the most value to me, and it gave me the most or the biggest aha moment to be like, okay, wow, it really understands and it got to the core of why I was feeling a specific way.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like the crux of the situation. And it got me to really be able to understand and tie in why my actions were taken in a specific way and how they intertwined with my core values as a person. So I thought
Mm-hmm.
that was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
So this is now she's teaching us about ACT. And as we said earlier on, one of the main strengths with ACT is the values work. And that's why it seems like it spoke to Herrick so much, because in this case, it really touched on some of his core values of at the end, it's all been about being a safe figure for his family, providing for his family, making sure that his family is taken care of. So I think this is kind of why it spoke so much to you folks, and that's why it resonates so well.
Mm-hmm.
Another part that's important is leaning into your discomfort. This is something we have not discussed as much before. But what ACT teaches you that some of those bodily sensations, for example, that are associated with thinking about situations as a threat, something we've discussed in CBT, the meaning, one of the ways ACT is teaching us to cope with it is not necessarily try to work through it the way CBT sometimes does, and as a result for those sensations to go away. But what ACT quite often teaches us is leaning into discomfort, learning to be more comfortable with that discomfort, building more tolerance, being able to recognize it. Okay, you know what? I'm safe. It's just that some of those emotions and bodily sensations are telling my mind that I'm not safe. They're not feeling safe there. But in reality, I am safe. Everything is okay. So learning to lean into it and build tolerance and stay with them longer is something where ACT is strong. For example, this comes from approach to therapy, such as mindfulness, right? So ACT integrates a lot of mindfulness into its work.
So when you said lean in a few times, is this kind of following on like desensitizing the person a little bit, or is that a way to think about it?
Yes, I guess we can say desensitizing is one. Other way is building more tolerance
Okay.
for those uncomfortable emotions. Literally being able to mindfully observe them
Mhm.
from afar, label them for what they are, our system bracing for impact, but realizing that the impact that we're expecting is actually not there. It's our mind and body's attempt to protect us, but the danger is not actually there. So, training our mind and our body to recognize that and learn to move on with our day, for example, while letting the discomfort linger on there, not trying as compulsively or as purposefully to get rid of the discomfort before we are able to move on to something else.
Just to lean in a little bit on what Nate said, he mentioned mindfulness. And I just want to let you know that next episode, it's something we're going to be spending the entire episode talking about. So definitely, if you're interested about the topic, lean in, tune in. We'll be doing live demos right on the podcast.
Next, AI asked me about which coping practice that I want to focus on, and particularly asked me what's the strongest or the loudest to me right now, whether it's body, emotions, or thoughts. And I chose to go with thoughts. It gave me a few options. The ones that I was the most interested in was based on ACT or CBT. One of the ones that was based on ACT was called thought distancing. And what it does is really helps you create space between your thought and what's actually happening. And how that would roughly work is that, and you would phrase it in a way to say, I'm having the thought that I could lose my job instead of saying, I'm going to lose my job. But the one that I chose that I'm going to go with is CBT style, and it's called reality testing the prediction. So that helps with catastrophization. So you don't go down that rabbit hole, I guess. And why it works is that it really helps your brain slow down and take it one step at a time so you're not going straight to the worst case outcome. And what it might feel like is that you're actually thinking through the probabilities one bit at a time instead of going from 0 to 100. So how it's going to work in practice is that we're going to break it down each step at a time into the chain and assess how likely is this really going to happen.
Right. So how likely is each step going to lead to another one, right? Like how
Mhm.
likely are you not to do well? How likely are your coworkers to disrespect you? How likely are you to lose your job?
Exactly.
Right. Amazing.
Mhm.
That sounds actually really,
That
really
sounds pretty cool.
interesting.
Let's get to it.
Nate, do you want to add anything to any of this?
Well, no, this all sounds great. Just to say, to go one step back about ACT. I mean, this is exactly one of the other techniques of ACT. For example, when you say instead of this is going to happen, I'm having a thought that this is going to happen. So you're right away acknowledging that basically all it is a thought.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts are not always accurate. Thoughts are might be misleading. Thoughts might be misleading. Thoughts are not always based on our factual or most accurate assessment information. And anyway, sometimes when we talk about thoughts and ACT, we just say it's a bunch of words that our mind throws together. Sort of the same way we think about AI, put in a response, ironically, right? So yeah, just wanted to say it, to throw it out there. But yes, I think starting from the CBT exercise is a great fit here.
I kind of want you to do both now.
One at a time. All right.
Good choice. Given how fast your mind jumped from report to job loss to family instability, slowing that chain down fits what you described. Okay, let's do that together now. First, let's write the chain clearly using your words. If I don't do a good job on this report, people will question my work. And in this economy, that could give them a reason to fire me, and then my family's stability is at risk. Is that the exact version you want to reality test, or would you tweak the wording slightly?
I think that's a good version, so let's go with it.
Okay, let's do that together now. We'll slow this down and examine it one link at a time, not to dismiss your concern, but to check how solid each step actually is. Here's the first link. Link 1. If I don't do a good job on this report, people will question my work. Just focusing on that part, on a scale from 0 100%, how likely is it that one less than perfect report would meaningfully damage how your coworkers see your competence?
Okay, so I think this was a good first link, and you can't see this, but in the response, when they said, how likely is it that one less than perfect report would meaningfully damage how your coworkers see your competency? They actually italicized one. So which I thought was good for a reader to observe and to say like, okay, yeah, you know, right? That's right. Like you at work, you do so many things and throughout your job, I'm sure you're going to do many assignments, reports and so on. Is one really going to be the one that kind of tips things over? It does give that good context. And
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So let's see what happens. Give you that type of response, and let's see where she takes you from here.
so I'm going to give it a low score, like 5% likely.
Sure. She's going to be like, well, we're done here then.
That's interesting. You're saying only about 5% likely that one less than perfect report would meaningfully damage how your coworkers see you. That tells me that when you slow it down, your rational side sees that this first link in the chain is actually pretty weak. Now let's move to the next link. Link 2. If people question my work, that could give them a reason to fire me. Again, just focusing on that step alone, how likely is that in percentage terms?
This is pretty powerful, eh?
That's pretty powerful. And I think with most people at work, you work on things, either independently or with your coworkers. And seldomly do I think it's you submit something and it's one and done. You don't do any revisions, you don't get feedback or make
Right.
updates. So thinking it from that perspective for this link too, it also means it's a very low likelihood that it would be a reason to fire you.
Okay, what are you going to rate
So
it?
I'm gonna also give it a 5.
Surprised she hasn't dismissed you yet.
Well, I think we made the prompt to say nice things only.
That's fair. That's fair. I guess that's what therapists do. I know it's not a therapist, but still.
They're like, you're wasting my time.
With your 5%.
All right, let's see what she says.
That's very consistent. You're seeing only about 5% likelihood that even if someone questioned your work, it would realistically lead to being fired. That suggests your rational assessment is quite different from the emotional intensity your body felt. Now let's look at the final link in the chain. Link 3. If I lost my job, it would immediately threaten my family's stability and freedom. Just focusing on that step, how likely is it that one job loss would instantly and irreversibly destabilize your family, given your actual resources, skills, and track record?
Okay. I think this is another one which is really good. And realistically, you know, this character that I'm playing would have a family.
Oh, this is
Has
not all about you?
No, it's not all. It just so happened to have my name in this
Oh, I see,
character,
I see.
right? So, but this character, I'm kind of just being in a relationship with a wife and kid, hoping that they're someone a bit more responsible. Sure, they have a job to have income. The wife also is a working spouse, so there's also income. So the likelihood that just by losing this job, that the whole family would like crumble like a house of cards also sounds kind of silly, I guess, if you say it like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I really like how these questions are asked. Once again, very much CBT style. So, for example, she wants you to take perspective here, and she wants you to put things in the context. So, to take some of the distances we spoke about, for example, with ACT as well, which is a third wave of CBT. So, she's asking you, considering your resources and fact record, right? So that means that she wants you to remember, okay, well, it sounds scary, but I do have some resources. There is a reason why I've been working for this. So adding context, adding nuance to that thought, making it less black and white, and also your fact record, right? So your record is pretty stellar. I mean, you've had a pretty consistent record of employment. So chances are, even if something as bad as losing a job happened, you would be able to find another job. So all of that to say, there is more taking the distance from the thought, seeing it in a more nuanced, more balanced, more realistic way, which CBT usually helps us to achieve.
Mhm. And just to give it its final answer, when it's saying on a scale of 0 to 100%, if I were to lose my job, it would immediately threaten my family's stability and freedom. Well, we know that in most modern marriages or so on, finances and everything is a big issue, or it could cause a lot of issues. So instead of the typical 5% I've been giving for the other answers, I'll give it a ginormous 10%, and let's see what AI comes back with.
Thank you for answering each step so clearly. So, when we break it down, link 1, one imperfect report, damaged reputation, 5%. Link 2, questioned work, fired, 5%. Link 3, job loss, immediate family instability, 10%. When your nervous system first reacted, it treated that whole chain like it was close to 100% certain. But when you slow it down, each step is actually low probability by your own judgment. That gap between emotional certainty and rational probability is exactly where anxiety tends to live. The brain runs a protect the provider scenario at full volume because what's at stake, family stability, matters deeply to you. Take a breath for a moment and notice your body as you look at those numbers. That's the end of this coping practice. How did that land? Did anything shift even slightly, or does it feel basically the same?
So after that discussion with AI, it ultimately asked me to rate how I feel now compared to the baseline that I had provided it at the start of this discussion. And from there, it gave me a couple of options. I could either go back and discover more about like body or emotion or values, and I can dig deeper into those different areas if I want, or I could just take a break and come back to it at another point in time if I would like.
Amazing. This was fascinating. Thank you, Herrick, for being our subject here. And thank you, Nate, for really giving us all the background and clinical explanations of how these therapy approaches work. I think we're going to end it here. Again, I think this was a fascinating episode. I think hopefully everyone found it as educational. It was psychoeducation after all. So, just to wrap it up, so for CBT, again, a reminder, CBT is based on simple but transformative idea that our thoughts, our feelings, and behaviors are deeply connected. When we learn to identify distorted or unhelpful thinking patterns, like catastrophizing or black and white thinking, we can gently challenge and reshape them. So by shifting our thoughts and experimenting with new behaviors, we can change how we feel. So that's CBT. ACT, which takes a slightly different approach. Instead of trying to change difficult thoughts or emotion, ACT actually teaches us how to make space for them, right? How to be with that discomfort. Through mindfulness and acceptance, we learn to stop fighting our inner experiences and instead focus on living in alignment with our values. The goal here, when it comes to ACT, isn't to eliminate discomfort, but to build a meaningful life alongside of it. So, a very different approach. In today's episode, we covered two powerful approaches, CBT and ACT. And together, these approaches offer very different yet complementary tools. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today. And please follow along. And we'll see you next episode when we talk about mindfulness. Thanks for joining us today. Just a quick reminder before you go, this episode is educational and not a substitute for professional care. And listening does not create a therapist-client relationship. If you are in immediate danger or at risk of harming yourself or someone else, call your local emergency number or contact a crisis line right away. All right, we'll see you in the next episode.